Welcome to the North Group podcast. At North Group, we are invited into organizations to influence leadership and organizational behavior. It is absolutely fascinating work. Today, we invite you into one of those conversations.
Today, I am joined by my friend, colleague, and North Group founder and current CEO, Roger North. And Roger, we're here to talk about something that we've heard a lot over the years. We've heard it said that 50-50 partnerships don't work. They never work. As a matter of fact, you should run the other way. So I can't wait to get your insights on this topic. But let's back up for a second. How would you describe the different ownership structures that you've observed? Here at North Group, we're not industry specific or client specific. We're in all sorts. So we see a lot of diverse and unique situations. So how would you describe some of what we've seen when it comes to ownership structures?
Yeah, so Gina, thanks. I think we're talking about privately owned.
Yes.
For-profit companies.
That is correct.
Or organizations. And as I was thinking about this, others might divide it up differently. I think I would probably divide it up into 5 segments.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
One I would call, and it's probably I don't know statistically, but the most common one we see is a single owner. Mm-hmm. Someone owns 100% of the stock, or however it's organized, whether it's an LLC or a sub-S or a corporation, C Corp, the single owner model. The second would be a majority owner with minority shareholders, one or more, and that can be common in, say, a family company as the next generation is being raised up and given an opportunity, but maybe the founder, maybe a father, maybe a mother maintains a majority interest for a period of time. The third would be the one you already referred to and probably is the most, I don't know if controversial is the right word, but gets the most discussion, is the 50-50. Mm-hmm. So we'll come back to that one because that has some interesting connotations. The fourth we currently have now at North Group, which this is just my language, but I call it the distributed shareholder model, where there's multiple shareholders, none of which, not a single person of which, has a majority. Mm-hmm. So there's a governance that's necessary within that framework, and you can have multiple owners. The fifth would be an employee-owned company, which is actually a legal and tax advantage format, commonly referred to as an ESOP, which is an acronym for Employee Stock Ownership Plan. Mm-hmm. We don't see that real often, but where we see it, it requires a significant investment in governance structure, trustee structure, legal counsel, but there can be significant tax advantages, and there can also be significant employee engagement advantages around the idea that employees can be there for the long term, can be invested in the future success of the company, and can eventually retire out with a significant retirement investment in the company that can then be turned into something for their older years. So I'm not going to say a whole lot about that because I'm not an expert in that area, and it does require legal and financial expertise and counsel. But it's a legitimate option for a minority number of companies.
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you. That's helpful. So we'll focus on the first 4 that you described. How would you describe some of the pros and cons of these different models?
Yeah.
And then, we'll circle into them.
Yeah, the first thing I would say, Gina, is just in my own history here since starting the company in 1997, I've participated in 3 of the 5.
Okay, well, there we go.
So I was never, maybe for a day, but I was never a single owner of the company. I never wanted to be by myself. And there were reasons for that, which I've talked about in other podcasts and other North Group conversations, just the value of having someone else with you to help make decisions, to give you accountability, things of that nature. So I never wanted to be a single owner. So I have been a majority owner with minority owners. I have been a 50-50 owner. That's the way we started the company.
Okay.
And we're currently living in a distributed shareholder model where we currently have 23 employees and 9 of them own shares in our company. That's fairly unusual in that we're not an employee-owned company per se because we don't have the ESOP tax strategy,
right.
But we're really employee-owned from the standpoint that almost half of our employees own shares at North Group. So I have participated in all 3, and I've frankly loved all 3.
Okay.
I think they were beneficial for different seasons of time in the company. And we've moved.
Tell me more about
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, of course, when we started out, there was no value to the company, and it was just myself and my original partner, Laura Shantz, and we had a good relationship. We felt like we could bring equal value to the company, and we never really debated the 50-50 thing. We didn't get into the 51-49 thing, and when she left 5 years into the company, we didn't really have any difficulty, doing that transaction. But it did force me to say, well, what's the next season of this? And that next season became the second form that I mentioned, which is a majority owner, which became me, with a couple of minority owners. So we functioned that way at North Group for a number of years. With my original shareholders were Dennis Clemmer and Darrell Lisey, and then over time, Jerry Murray, Craig Sloniger, Brian Black also moved into that. And that required some hard work. And when I say hard work, just an understanding of what the rights and responsibilities were I became at one point a 51% owner.
Okay.
And then the other 5 men had shared equally the remaining shares. How were we going to govern under that model? Was I going to be the czar? Was I going to be the dictator? And I'm sure they felt that way from time to time, but it wasn't my intention to focus that way. So I think, you've got these legal structures, but within that, you've got what's way more important than legal structures, which is you've got relationships.
Absolutely.
And then you've got commitment to relationships, and you've got execution of relationships. And so my commitment in that area was to function in a shared ownership and a shared governance model, and to respect the wonderful experience and insights and contributions that the other guys brought, and really never to make decisions that we weren't all united around. We did have the option that if it ever had to, if we ever got to a stalemate, and I'll go ahead and say we never did.
Okay.
We never got to a stalemate.
Yeah. Yep.
But if we did, it was clear, how that would be done. And I think when I offered minority positions to these very accomplished people, we just talked about what I could do, but was committed to not doing, which was the dictator type of approach. And at the end of the year, if I feel like I've performed much better than you, I'll take all the money and you don't get a vote, and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And I hope I never did that. I don't think I ever did that. But it does require a lot of conversation about what is the role of a minority owner. Now, in our case, these are highly productive people that were making a significant contribution to not only our annual results, but to our franchise value overall, which was beneficial to them. There are other forms of minority ownership where people are not even employed, or maybe they have non-voting stock.
Sure, okay.
We did not have that structure, and we're not going to go too deep into that structure today. But of course, you can get into voting and non-voting stock, and there's good reasons for that. Currently working with a family that's working through those questions and really thinking through their shared vision of the future and how voting and non-voting and employment and non-employment works in that type of a setting. So that's another form.
Yeah, we could almost make that option number 6.
Yeah, it sits in the distributed shareholder model, but it gets into more sophisticated legal questions about who has voting rights and who doesn't, and how you elect those representatives to a board. Governance is a conversation for a different day.
Okay.
The 50-50 model is the one that we get the most questions about.
Yeah, everybody's afraid of it. Nobody likes a tie, right? We go into overtime.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff about a tie. But really, when you're in a privately owned company, the phrase that we like to use here is relationships should lead transactions. And I was reflecting, in fact, you and I were talking a few days ago in your office about our own experience on not-for-profit boards. You serve on a couple of ministry and community boards, as do I. I've been doing that type of work for 30 plus years. And I can remember very few, actually, if any, times when a not-for-profit board that was governing a a community organization, community benefit organization, or a ministry had actual votes, like 8-5 or 12-4 votes. In those types of settings, we almost always had, if not always, had enough discussion, enough input from the staff, enough consideration by the board members that we could get to unanimity. And that's how the large majority of not-for-profit organizations are governed.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because we see that, right, in the boards that we're a part of.
Yes.
This idea that what we're all afraid of, that we can't get there, right? That we can't get to a unanimous decision. That we, I mean, that's the ideal team, right? The highly cohesive team is one that can have healthy conflict and enough conversation to get to a great result where people can walk out the door united.
Yeah.
But for some reason, we're afraid of that. So
now there are a couple of functions that operate here, and the two main ones I would think of, I think they're fairly obvious, are time and money.
of course,
So time is roughly the same when you're talking about for-profit and not-for-profit, in that time is a real issue, and sometimes decisions need to be made within a certain time frame.
Sure.
And so we need to decide, do we have enough time? Do we have enough energy? Do we have enough capacity to get to create enough conversation where we can get to I'm a little afraid of using the word consensus, but to a unanimous type of decision, and don't have to take a vote where there's split decisions and people walking away feeling like losers, and maybe even feeling like they don't want to support the decision that has been made, which is the most risky part of that approach. So time is a factor, and leaders, executive committees, CEOs, board chairs need to consider that factor.
Yeah, sure. Yep, it's very real.
The other issue is money. In a not-for-profit organization, money is very important, but it's not necessarily personal to the people making the governance decisions. By contrast, in a privately owned company, you're making decisions, hopefully, and I think in most cases that we're thinking of, they're in the best interest of this overall organization or corporation of which we are shareholders and trustees, stewards, if you will. But there's still our own bank account and our own net worth involved, and it's not hard to start thinking about it in a personal way as opposed to a collective way. And so the creation of healthy discussion, healthy relationships, shared view of the future is particularly important in most of these models, but certainly in the majority-minority owner, certainly in the 50-50, and certainly in the distributed shareholder model, so that we have ample time. And sometimes that time allows me to move from a somewhat personal, or shall we say, selfish view of how this decision is going to, what's in it for me, onto a more longer-term view. And that's what I love about working with so many of the clients that we work with, is the most successful clients have a long-term view of what their company is about.
Yeah, right.
And it is not about maximizing current value or current distributions or current salaries or things of that nature. It's just, for most of our clients, it's not about that. Now, there are other forms of ownership when you get private equity involved and 5-year turnarounds and things about that. And they're legitimate in our economy. They're just not things that we deal with within our client base very often.
Yeah.
So.
But what you were describing there made me think of a phrase we often use here at North Group, and it's the idea of honor the entity.
Yes.
Right? That long-term view. Let's do what's best for the organization, not just, this point in time or a certain department or a certain, goal that maybe I was after. So you did mention earlier the idea of something that we often encounter is a majority owner who then has maybe sons and or daughters as minority owners. And I would think that there's a couple things going on there. One, it's generational, and the second is it's majority minority. Any kind of observations or experiences that you would have specifically with that structure?
Yeah, I think that in our experience, family-owned companies require more care, and there's more at risk. And I think we just have to acknowledge that. There's obviously financial risk involved with ownership of a private company. But the thing that I think we really want to care for here at North Group and with the wonderful clients that we work with is the relational risk that's involved. And our view would be, money is important, and we're a capitalist system is imposed on us, and we're the beneficiaries of a capitalist system. But care for relationships, particularly in families, particularly when there's a generational ownership view. We want to own this company for the benefit of our family, the benefit of our employees, the benefit of our clients, and the benefit of our community for the long term. Requires a significant investment relationally. And so when you're talking about generations where you have, say, a father, a mother, a patriarch, a matriarch, and next generation coming into typically minority ownership is the way that may happen through transaction, may happen through gifting, whatever the mechanism is. It carries additional relational risk. In addition, it carries a need to overcome a belief about other people's behavior that is seated much more long-term than it is in a private company where the owners, such as here at North Group, have not necessarily grown up in a family together.
Right.
So Bobby was always that way.
Right.
We have to overcome those sorts of things because you and I have had a discussion before. I think we did a podcast before, like, can people change as a tiger changes stripes? And our view of that would be, yes, but it's really hard. And so in families, overcoming that and functioning well in that majority-minority owner model and eventually getting to the point where that can flip and the next generation can buy out, so to speak, or gift out from the prior generation, just requires a lot of care, primarily because of the relational risk.
Yeah. And what's interesting is you think about the flip that you mentioned, oftentimes we get focused on the incoming, right? Developing those folks who are transitioning to majority or next generation leaders. But there's also a piece, and this is likely a podcast for another day, but how does the exiting leader leave well? Because that is difficult. It's a lot harder than I would assume, right, than we think. But
you're hitting me right in the solar plexus there,
right.
Gina. That's what I'm doing right now.
You are in the middle of that right now, and you're doing it well, Roger.
Oh, you're very
Not
kind.
always
Thank
easy.
you.
I'm quite convinced, but yeah. So we talked about, as we focus on transition in an organization, specifically around these organizational or ownership structures, that we need to focus on relationships. Like, that's the key. There's also a piece where there's a tactical component, and we've seen people get hyper-focused on one aspect. Either it's all about the taxes or it's all about some legal component, and I think that's a little bit we would view in the weeds. You need to have those conversations, but you don't want one of those to lead. And then another element of the tactical is you do need some of that because you need to make sure that you have a willing seller and that you have a willing buyer. So I kind of threw two different questions at you there, but yeah, what thoughts would you have?
Yeah, well, when we talk about relationships, the reason we're talking about relationships, obviously in family and in business, there's relational risk that we want to care for. But primarily from a corporate or ownership standpoint, what we're doing with those relationships is we're having the relationships move us toward a common vision of the future. And the most important vision when we're talking about this ownership thing in context is, where do we want to head with this ownership model? Because it is legitimate for shareholders of a company to decide to sell to an outside entity. That may be the best thing at some point in time. But by contrast, a number of the clients we're privileged to work with they have a generational family vision. And that's a different kind of thing. When we are committed to running an organization that we're consistently preparing for the next generation, whoever they may be. Currently working with just a wonderful family that has both G1 and G2 involved. They work very well together. And the primary focus that we're working through right now is how does the generational family vision play itself out in G3? Because in G1 we had one person. In G2 we have three people. And in G3, we have 9.
Now we have lots of cousins,
We
right?
and they're cousins, not brothers or sisters. They didn't grow up in the same family. And it's not likely that all 9 will be employed in the company.
Sure.
So we're going to end up with a distributed shareholder model
Okay.
in all likelihood. There's probably not going to be a majority owner. And so we need to begin working at our view of what is best to maintain their common vision of a generationally owned and led company into the 3rd generation. And you always have to be thinking at least 1, if not 2 generations ahead. And it just simply gets harder just by the numbers.
Right. Yeah, the numbers are a reality in that.
So I
sure.
think that to us, I think at North Group, that would be the thing we would work at the most is what do you want for the next generation? What do you think is best for the next generation? And how will the stewardship or ownership of that next generation continue all the benefits that a successful company gives? They give benefit to their employees. They give benefit to their customers and clients. And they give benefit to the larger community.
Yeah.
And when that is not stewarded well, there's a whole lot of people that pay a negative price for that. And so having that common vision, working hard at it, getting people committed to that, calling people to account when they stray for that or move into the personal is all part of the relational process that we're talking about, guiding us toward a common vision of the future.
Well, thank you. It's so interesting to just, hear about these different structures, the pros and the cons. And I think a theme here is there really isn't a one-size-fits-all. There's no right answer. But one of the themes for successful ownership structures and transitions is this idea of focusing in on the relationships and then what is that generational vision, and to make sure you're thinking far enough ahead. So thank you. Engaging conversation, really appreciate it, and hopefully our listeners have some really good takeaways.
Thank you, Gina.
You bet.